Well, for more on China's economy, I spoke to Wang via Zoom. He's Chief Emerging Markets and China Strategist at Alpine Macro. And I asked how China's economy bounced back and the outlook for 2021.
Well, I think China, from China's point of view, the pandemic was under much better control. Actually, to the ordinary Chinese people, the pandemic pretty much ended in March. So after that, the economy was able to fully recover. Some of the hardest hit sectors, restaurant sales, cinema, box office, domestic travel, they all fully bounced back. So that's one of the reasons why the economy fully recovered. And on top of that, earlier this year, after the pandemic, the Chinese policymakers also had pretty aggressive stimulus packages, both in terms of monetary policy and fiscal policy. So that's also part of the reason why the economy has fully recovered. In 2021, I think the economy will actually in the first half of the year, macro numbers will look spectacular. Not only because the economy is still accelerating, but also we know Chinese numbers are reported as a year-over-year annual rate. So earlier this year, we had such a low base. So that will amplify the strength of the Chinese economy, at least how the number will look. So into the next year, the economy will do fairly well.
Now, some people have been wondering about the evenness of the recovery. What's your take on that?
Right. Obviously the recovery has not been even, simply because earlier this year, the sectors that fully recovered very quickly was the state sector kept spending on infrastructure, those kind of policy-driven parts of the economy. But as the economy recovery broadens, then we will see the laggards to catch up. So that will drive the second half of the recovery. For example, capital spending by the private sector, consumption, all these kind of sectors that were laggards so far will catch up. So that will drive the second half of the recovery.
And we did see that Chinese exports were able to grow in recent months, especially as the rest of the world is still grappling with COVID. Do you think the current pace of exports can really sustain the Chinese economy?
I don't think it will sustain the Chinese recovery, but obviously that will be helpful. Exports account for 18% of the Chinese GDP. So that's a big part of the Chinese economy. If let's say global demand picks up, demand for Chinese goods will strengthen. So that will be good news for Chinese labor market, will be good news for wages, for consumption. So on that front, I think that will be good news. So China will benefit from the demand increase from the rest of the world. But it doesn't really, it's not really the main driver.
What are you keeping an eye on in terms of what are going to be the main drivers in 2021?
Yeah, so main driver, one of the main drivers was, let's say, the Chinese policy easing, right? So now we know China was the first country got into the pandemic, got into the growth meltdown. It's also the first country getting out of it. So it's normal to expect that China will be the first country to tighten the policy. So, if that's the case, then one of the main drivers of the recovery will be removed going into next year. So to me, I think that will probably be the most important risk for investors to monitor.
So then as we look at China's relationship with the US, obviously its biggest trading partner, how do you see that continuing under a Biden administration? And really, what does Beijing want out of this relationship going forward?
Well, Beijing obviously wants to have a constructive relationship with the US, because China benefited tremendously from globalization. And China and the US are the largest players in the global economy. So obviously, from Beijing's point of view, Beijing benefited from the global market, benefited from the global technology. So obviously, China wants to have a working, functioning relationship with the US. I think in the next year, Biden presidency will probably usher in a more predictable environment for China. I think at least in the first half of his presidency, because he will be preoccupied by domestic priorities. He will try to deal with the pandemic, the vaccine, the racial divide in the US. I think those domestic challenges will be Biden's top priorities going into the first year of his presidency. So that's why I think the foreign policy, China policy, will be on the back burner. So that will kind of reduce the tension, reduce the geopolitical pressure between the two countries.
And as we look at the sort of domino effect that's really arisen under the Trump administration, a lot more tension with other areas of the world, be it Europe, Australia. How do you see those economic and geopolitical tensions affecting China's economy going forward?
Yeah, I think the conflict between China and some other countries are mainly some other countries that are closest allies to the U.S. But if you look at, for example, China has been improving relationship with Japan. China has been, the biggest achievement obviously was November. They just signed this region RCEP, regional economic partnership. So that's a huge trade bloc. China plus 14 major most important economies in Asia. So I think the strategy from China's perspective is try to build as many free trade blocs as possible.